Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, and welcome to the Global Association of Islamic Schools Scholar Series. We are very honored to have today Sheikh Dr. Mustafa Styer. Sheikh Mustafa, welcome to the Scholar Series.
Thank you for having me, Sayyidi, and lovely to be in the company of all these Mubarak people, mashallah, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So
good to be
let me begin, of course, with... Yes, good to be back again, reunited, and I'll share a bit of our story as well, because we've, of course, crossed paths in the outside of the digital world too. But let me begin with a proper introduction and beginning with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I would also like to begin with a special dua for all those making Hajj this year, members of our community en route, inshallah. We pray that they have a safe journey and that Allah accepts their pilgrimage. Please keep us in your du'as as well. So I would like to introduce Sheikh Mustafa. Sheikh Mustafa Styer is an American-born, Oxford University-trained educator and researcher of Islamic philosophy, specializing in curriculum development from the University of London. Sheikh Mustafa has devoted many years in developing an Islamic education curriculum, which we will learn about a little bit today, inshallah, in the UK and elsewhere. He has worked as a head teacher, a deputy head, curriculum coordinator, and a teacher trainer in Tarbiyah for the Association of Muslim Schools in the UK, which was established by Islam. Dr. Mustafa is currently the Al-Bukhari Foundation Fellow at the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. He teaches in the Faculty of Theology and Religion, and he has a forthcoming book on theology and religion. It's a monograph series that unearths the structure of revival of the Islamic sciences, Ihya al-Ulumuddin of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. So it is a great honor to have him here with us. In fact, I met Sheikh Mustafa this, I believe it was past summer or 2 summers ago at a Taba retreat where we looked at a classification of the sciences, and that was also a very Mubarak gathering. But previous to that, I in fact took the logic course that is part of the life curriculum, and that's where I first became aware of Sheikh Mustafa, and I don't know if I've even shared that with you, but that's where we first interacted some probably 4 or 5 years ago. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So we're very honored to have you today. And part of the Scholar Series, the impetus for doing this was to bring scholars from our tradition, ideally who also are practitioners in education, but not always, into conversation with Islamic school educators through our global network, and to look at how we can draw upon our tradition to revive our practices. And I think the title of this session encapsulates one of the things we're trying to do at the GIS as part of this global movement is to revive our tradition and bring it into conversation with modernity, with the challenges of the contemporary world. And so I am very much looking forward to our discussion today, and we'll dive right in, inshallah. But before we dive in, I just want to share a few remarks too that I think will help frame our conversation today, and perhaps even draw on some of the provocations, some of the questions that you posed in the paper that was shared with our group. So one of the things that we have discussed both through the session at the Taba group, where we looked at a classification of the sciences, one of the questions that came out of that was, what do we do with this? And why is it important? Why should we care about the Mabadi Ashra, for example, the 10 principles? Why should we care about classifying the sciences? How is this relevant to our work in Islamic schools currently, where we're on the ground dealing with the messiness of the contemporary world? And so your project and your work has been very inspiring to me personally, because you've been on what you call a knowledge journey. And perhaps that's a place we could start our conversation. If you could just share briefly that journey, which I know has taken you from the US to Syria to Turkey to now currently in Cairo. and also to the halls of Oxford, both as a student and now as a lecturer. So perhaps you could begin by just sharing some of that blessed knowledge journey that you've been on, and then we can kind of go from there into some of the areas that we hope to discuss today, inshallah. So Sheikh Mustafa, welcome, and looking forward to our session.
Thank you, and thank you again for having me and for hosting this, and for all the other wonderful background work that you've been doing. May Allah bless it and bless all the people that are involved, inshallah ta'ala. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Not to repeat your dua, you've already opened us with Alhamdulillah wa salatu ala Rasulillah and with Basmala. So we have barakah in this session, inshallah ta'ala. Yes, I mean, you know, it's like when someone says to you, what's your conversion story? You have you have to know which like the Quran, when it tells the story of Sayyidina Musa or someone, it doesn't repeat the same facts, right? So this will be an abbreviated version for education, really. Yeah, so I almost with taking the Shahada, simultaneously went and studied in Damascus a long time ago, when political circumstances were very different, and returned to the UK and was immediately in contact with Idris Mears, who was then the head of the AMS, literally the operations man with the office up in Birmingham. And I was placed into an Islamic school and started my work, and saw what a headache the curriculum was. And yeah, so I started to specialize in curriculum. I considered it to be a fard kifaya, which becomes fard ayn when you start to engage on it, to make a properly integrated curriculum. So what we typically see is the Islamic studies aspect of the curriculum is the weakest, and it's at odds with its the rest of the curriculum. That they're contradictory principles, right? So in order to make a full curriculum during that time, I went and studied Islamic art with Adam Williamson and Latifa Spiker, and got in contact with Turkish artists. I eventually became aware of the late classical curriculum, which I'll talk about later, and started an MA. So I did an MA, which was titled, at the Institute of Education, Can the and I'm skipping lots of things that might come back up later. The question was, can you achieve the aims of Islamic education on a voluntary aided school model? And so that gave me the opportunity to actually put everything into a timetable, you know, and see, can you really build this insan kamil, this perfect person, as much as possible, right, on the model of the Prophet. And that involved interviewing a lot of people. And in a way, it was a window into the World Conferences on Islamic Education, Sayyid Naqib al-Attas. I used all of that material, plus all of the kind of traditional or classical models. So Charlotte Mason, I looked at, you know, many different models, well-trained mind, and drew on them, and then started to make curriculum and implement it either in my classroom or in the various roles that I had. And I tried to kind of throw myself into the various pieces of the puzzle that would need to be there so that the whole model could be like designed by an architect, right? So an architect doesn't have to be able to get his chisel out and, you know, etch Islamic calligraphy perfectly into stone. But they have to know enough about it to make sure that it goes right, because they're taking responsibility for it at the end of the day. So I gave myself that task and was kind of going around into nasheed and maqamat and the Islamic sciences as well. So I kind of like to allow the rest of it to come back to me as it does, as it just flows with the conversation. So back to you. Yeah. Let me add. Well, let me just say that I didn't mention Taba or Oxford yet. So, I mean, you mentioned Islamic philosophy. I really tried to make sure that everything that I did after I came back was directly related to answering those curriculum questions. And I believe that for Islamic education to be to really move into the other parts of the curriculum in a proper integrated way, because I had a chapter in my thesis on integration, and I have to say that most people's notion of integration is either sort of a 1960s hippie notion of integration, or it's a social constructivist notion. And with social constructivism, there you could arguably say there is no such thing as truth, right? Because truth has to be that my knowledge and concepts accord with things as they are in themselves. But when you're saying all knowledge is a construction, there's nothing to know other than what's in your mind. You know, you are making the concepts. It is more complicated than that, and that's what I've been working on with Taba. So my 7-year project is on, you know, can definition know the realities of things, and that's taken me into natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and everywhere. So with the Taba work, you know, I think we're building on Sayyid Naqib al-Attas and others. We, in a way, felt that there are certain questions that we need direct answers to. You know, if the modern world is in the shadow of Immanuel Kant, then what, you know, do we have a critique of Kant? Do we have a real good notion of how it emerged from him, so we can see the Kantianism in the social sciences, in the humanities, and even in the natural sciences? And I know that sounds, yeah. Okay, so with the Taba work, you probably will lead us into that, right? But one of the papers at the recent retreat was on the 10 principles. And I just want to say that there's a paradigm here, right? Which is that if you're dealing with the 10 principles of sciences, what do you mean by a principle? If you mean an eternal and unchanging starting point for deriving other knowledge, then you are committed right off the bat to realism and foundationalism. And modernity is what we call immanentist. So it doesn't matter whether you're continental or analytic or natural sciences or social sciences, they all basically stop with whatever you can phenomenally sense, and they would say you can't derive even the notion of causality from that. You can talk about correlation, right, in the natural sciences, or in the social sciences, they'd say you cannot derive values from your immanent experience, right? It's either your subjective experience or it's just plain old empirical facts. But for us, those things are connected in a very fundamental way. And that's something I'd be happy to go into more. But if these are things that if you get them right, you can see right through all the contemporary sciences and how you can benefit from some of their findings, but realize that they didn't actually get to their findings through their principles. They got there in spite of them. So it's like Professor Rajab Shinturk said at one point. He said, how are you going to Islamize Freud when his principles are so not only wrong, but sort of foul in a certain way? You can't, unless you just deconstruct all the parts and reinterpret them. And so, you know, do I really like some of the findings of Max Weber about modernity? Yeah, I do. I think it's insightful, and we need to learn from him. But you're learning from his findings, just like Galileo. What did he do? He turned his telescope up at Jupiter, and he said, "Look, there are rings around this. It's not what the ancient philosophers said it was. It's like immaterial." Did his philosophy lead him there, or did his instrument? And does his instrument give him experience, or does it mediate and replace human experience? These are the questions that Edmund Husserl asks in his crisis of the, what does he call it? Crisis of the European Sciences, where he says we have to undo positivism, basically. So we have friends So we don't want to black and white it, right? We want to say that, first of all, there are two Europes, right? There's not one. And one of them is more our travel companion. Okay, let me pull back here and hear from you. So yeah.
Me to learn so much. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. I was just saying that this is what I love about our conversations, is that they go in so many directions. Now, I will share that to prepare for Taba, I had to spend a summer reading philosophy from the Enlightenment up to the modern period, even just to engage with the work at a very superficial level. And Sheikh Mustafa helped me with that. Now, this is a big challenge for Islamic school educators, because when I first started to read this, there was a lot to unpack here. And I think what came out of that Taba retreat, the 5 or 6 of us that formed a working group from Abadi Ashura, was asking these questions. What do we do with this? And how do we bring this into our Islamic schools? Why is it important? Now, what personally inspired me was when I started to look into our tradition, I found that it was transformative, and very much so up until the late Ottoman period. And you talk about this in your paper. So my question was, what happened? How did it get so disintegrated to the point where we are now, where what we're turning to as a best model is STEM or STEAM? And I want to share a few excerpts from your paper, because I think this will help frame our conversation and bring it into the immediate real challenges of educators on the ground. So if you'll allow me here, I highlighted a few sections from your paper, and I'll just read these, and then we can comment on them. So the first part here, you write, it was once the battle cry of British Muslim teachers, and we can expand that to probably Muslim teachers everywhere, for the need to have an integrated model. To inform our educational practice, we need to be able to draw on the madrasa curriculum, the traditional curriculum, which still taught all of the sciences. And here we're referring to the Islamic sciences, not just the natural sciences. Little did these school teachers know that between al-Razi, Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, who died in 1210, and 100 years ago, up to the late Ottoman period, the madrasa had indeed absorbed the best in literature, adab, including Persian literature, science, and philosophy. But it had also produced a medieval synthesis containing a philosophy of education more soundly integrated than any of the current authors, that the current author, that would be you, know of. So that there was this intact tradition, because when I started looking into this, like you have said in the past, you, in English at least, you find work translated by Al-Ghazali, then you might find some work from the 1977 World Conference, the paper by Al-Atis, but other than that, there's this dearth of literature, and you kind of wonder, did it just die out? What happened here? So that was one question. I thought we could start with your comments on that. And then we have some provocations you put later in the paper that I'd like to bring up too, because as educators, we love good questions and you post them. But if you could comment on that statement to help us understand kind of what happened and where we're at, why we find ourselves in the situation we're in right now in Islamic schools.
Yeah, I want to bring one thing in to the foreground in every educator's mind, which is that there is not just one. Let's say that. By the way, we need to be able to use words like rainbow and unicorn without any baggage, right? But let's say you have a rainbow of your sciences, or let's use another metaphor. Let's say stained glass window. First of all, we believe that sciences can be constructed, but they can also mirror things as they are in themselves, right? So that there's a logical relationship. This one is right next to that one. This one is under that one. This one is above that one. This is parallel to that one, and to see that the sciences that were there was a classification, and that they integrated the Sharia with that. So first of all, even if you look at the nature of the sciences before you do this integration, you see that they're looking for essential and timeless knowledge. And that in a way, modernity is polemical against this. not only against it, but against even anything called tradition, right? So Descartes says, you know, do like him and sit in your winter cabin in front of your fireplace, and take all of the ideas out of your mind as though they're furniture in your house, and completely empty your house. Now, anyone that knows anything about psychology knows that you cannot do that. And if you did remove absolutely everything, then, you know, you would either be insane. I mean, you know, there's a lot of history of brainwashing and attempts to, if you want to watch Adam Curtis movie documentaries on that, it's not possible. But you see there's a polemic, right? Again, Francis Bacon, in his Novum Organum, right? He says, the ancients, all they do is deduction. They don't really know anything about induction. Induction is the way forward, and I reject deduction, deductive knowledge. Well, then you've got a one-wheeled car, you know? So it's a polemic of ancients versus moderns. And even Auguste Comte, the founder of positivism, he said basically that there are three levels of every science. It starts off with sort of religion and magic, which is the level of ignorance. Then it moves to metaphysics, which is still, you know, kind of pie in the sky vanity. And then it moves into positivist, empirically based science. Now, the problem is that he limits things to the empirical, so it's not a real empiricism. Empiricism is supposed to get you from sense experience to knowledge, which is the intelligible nature of things. You know, what is its nature? How is it causative with other things? That's knowledge, right? And arguably, there's another level of knowledge beyond that, even, which is, you know, qurb and purification of the heart, and seeing things almost directly with the ruh instead of the intellect, which is kind of the level of ihsan in the Jibril hadith, right? Okay, so no matter how we get involved in this narrative, we have to see that the contemporary sciences, even in mathematics and history and everything else, they have brought a deconstructivist or a empiricist or whatever version of that science into its place, and they claim a superiority to it. So we actually kind of enter into this conversation on various back feet. You know, we're pushed onto our back foot, as it were. So what I started to see is that in every field, I'll use one example that you went on the logic course. When the new symbolic logic came out, initially they said, oh, Aristotelian logic is invalid. It's surpassed. It's built on a priori metaphysics, which Kant showed to be invalid. Modern logicians themselves eventually came to refute all three of those things. So now we're saying traditional logic, it does two things. It maps onto the way human beings think, and it accords with the way things have being outside of the mind. So if you don't have a mirror between being and knowledge, you don't really have knowledge, right? And what modern symbolic logic actually does is it formalizes things so much that it doesn't accord with either being or reality. So that's really good for AI. It's really good for launching rockets, you know, up the Euphrates or whatever it is. It's really good at that type of thing, but it excludes the nature. You know, there's a whole discussion between. So I don't want to go into too much philosophical detail, but what is the point? The point is that if we don't dig ourselves out of this, then yeah, and how did it happen in a nutshell? And I have a slide deck prepared, by the way, so I want to think about how to work that in. But in a nutshell, 1950s India, mutiny, madrasas are closed down, the ulama are systematically killed, not completely slaughtered, but they're just like, I don't know how he justified that, right? But Napoleon killed 5 to 7 scholars a day when he was in Egypt. So, and yet claimed to be friends with the other ones, right? So it's a weird dynamic. Okay, but the point is, madrasas closed down, early 1900s in Beirut and other places like Cairo here, initially called Protestant universities. Now they're called American University, Beirut and Cairo. They replaced the elite education such that the local families stopped sending their children to Al-Azhar and started sending them to these American universities, which are quite secular even for American standards. And, you know, from there, I would say that, like Professor Rajab Shinturk has a paper on the term that he uses is decline, right? That if you look at the decline narrative, people say, because we have to get this narrative right as well. Where is our ideal curriculum? I can give some characteristics that have to be there in that, and point to what I think is. But basically, he would say there was a paper saying that the decline began in 13th century. Then someone refuted that. Then someone refuted the 14th century. Then they refuted the 15th century. Then they refuted the 16th, 17, 18. So it really is just the last 200 years where you can really locate a decline. And what are you declining from? You're declining from a fully integrated set of sciences that has metaphysics at its top, which is a universal science. This is referred to by North African scholars as well. Al-Yusi quotes Imam al-Ghazali from the Mustafa. Dr. Omar Qureshi, the provost at Zaytuna, has a paper on this in the philosophy of Islamic education, how there has to be a universal science that establishes the being of things. And then the other sciences branch down from that. So then you have on the theoretical side, your mathematics and natural science. And on the practical side, you have politics, economics, really, and home management, and ethics, right? And the Sharia basically in the subcontinent, Indian subcontinent, replaces all three of those, but it doesn't just remove them, it integrates with them. So if you go back and you read how the Sharia and fiqh books handle all of these topics, they're handled classically, right? What is the subject that we're talking about? What are the attributes of it we're studying, and how do we prove that those attributes apply to that thing so we can have real knowledge and integrate that with Quran and Sunnah? That's how our top ulama operated, and they do that everywhere and across the curriculum. Let me pull back again and throw back over to you. But I think those things kind of need to be,
yes,
so we know what we're looking for.
Absolutely, and learning that history. Yeah, what's that, Sheikh Mustafa?
Teachers might be saying, how do I use this? So we'll answer those questions. Yeah. We will. Yeah. So hang in there.
I'm going to get to those provocations, but hang in there, because this history, though, is really important to know. And I like a term that Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad has used for Islamic education, which is an Adamic education, which is actually a backwards journey, you know, to Adam alayhi salam, who was given all the names. But along that way, we can kind of learn about our tradition and see what were those ingredients that made it so transformative that we had places produced like the Hagia Sophia. I mean, you just go to Turkey and you get a sense of the greatness of our civilization, what was built there by Muslims, and all over the Islamic world where these places are still left. You see that level of ihsan. So I want to transition into your slide deck. I want to share a few of these provocations from your paper that you have, I think, on page 3 or 4, and perhaps we'll look then at, and this may be in your slide deck, of how life curriculum, what you and your team have been developing over the last several years, how it answers some of these questions and how it may be a solution for some of the challenges we're facing in Islamic schools. So let me read those provocations, and then we'll get your slide deck up here. So I'm just going to find the section here.
That idea of
here we go.
returning as well and remembering it's also a Platonic notion, right? It's the idea that the knowledge is already in the soul and we have to return to it. So Adam is taught the names, and we all have the Alastu bi Rabbikum moment, right? Am I not your Lord? So all of his progeny was in that presence. And so there's a return. How do you do that? That's a big question. Okay, so one of the things that I like to do is just to say that let's use the models that our predecessors used rather than reinventing the wheel from Quran and Sunnah, because reinventing the wheel from Quran and Sunnah can often lead you to do things that the real scholars of Quran and Sunnah wouldn't have done, right? So so how do we do it? That's why life has chosen the model that it has. But go ahead.
Okay, so I found these provocations, and I'll just add to that, even looking at the etymology of a word like education, educare and educere, of withdrawing from within the well. This is that kind of fitra model that I love. And another is, of course, filling in. So those, I think it's so helpful to understand these conceptual frameworks, and they're very inspiring when you look at what are the meaning of these words. And I know that's a specialty of yours, is definitions. So I won't go into that area because I know we could get on a very interesting tangent. But let me read these provocations, and then we'll get your slide deck up. So in the paper, you write, a central problem caused by the currents of specialization and secularization, including an attack even on liberal arts education, which is swept into the Muslim world, is that there exists no known model for how and where to teach what. What is the Fard Ain taught? Or when is the Fard Ain taught? Where is piety taught and how? If modern subjects are either scientistic or culturally relativistic, how do we guide students through their education experience? How are we to produce an integrated person, this insan al-kamil, on a model of adding weekend and after-school madrasa to the long hours of school education? If there were a madrasa which taught all the sciences, what would it look like? How would it cater for the complete education? So those are some big questions posed in that paper. And I know part of life, the work being done there, is to answer some of those questions. So at this point, I'll ask Brother Idris to please put up our slide deck. And just to give you, Sheikh Mustafa, maybe we can do an abbreviated version of this. We can go for about 20 minutes or so, and I do want to save some time for our audience members to engage with you, and perhaps we can share the slide deck, or we can share the paper, of course, too. And by the way, before I forget to mention, you have another talk that is available on YouTube, which also goes into some of these issues through the Cambridge Central Mosque channel. So you decide what you think is going to be most beneficial, but of course, there's always much more to dive into here.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to keep to some of the prompts that you've made and really just have a minute or two. So that is not, well, let's say we'll go for a practical compromise here. The ideal would be to expand on some of the slides more than I'll do, but how about we leave that for Q&A as well. So I'm going to really focus on one point, which is, why do I believe that if this curriculum model is not, at least if we don't at least attempt to implement it, that what we're doing results in what my thesis supervisor at the master's level at the Institute of Education referred to as a missed opportunity. So the Adamic nature is should be the basis of education, and I'll point that out here. This model is the only one that I know, after looking for 20 years, that answers it. So I also have to show that it's possible, right? I believe it's possible because I'm doing it. Yeah. There's a Chinese proverb that says that if you're already doing something, don't let someone convince you that it's impossible to do. So, right. So that will, everything else I'll shrink down and just sort of pass over with a quick reading.
Okay, so we'll get into a few of the slides then, Sheikh Mustafa, and I'll give you a kind of a reminder when we get to the half-hour mark at the half of the hour, which will be in about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a little time for questions, inshallah. Okay, and I think I'll just give a thumbs up when I'm ready for the next slide, if that works. Yep. I don't have anything else that would, be okay. So we want to have the big picture here in mind, so that we're answering all the questions at one go, right? So when we talk about reviving Islamic education, what do we mean by Islamic education, right? And Islamic is, was identified 20 years ago as one of the most abused words in Islamic education. So in order for it to be practical, we have to talk about the challenges. So we have to be aware of our cultural context, and we have to be aware of the challenge of teacher training. When we're talking about the change that has occurred, we have to recognize that there has successfully been a mass culture that was produced probably from, you could say, as early as the 1870s into the 1920s, 1960s, where you had people like H.G. Wells that started to write literature for the newly produced mass reading public in the UK. And the UK is, in a way, it's a model for Europe and the US, and we're all English speakers here, presumably. So then education takes a mass model, right? Science comes onto the curriculum rather late, right? And eventually the kind of classics and that type of curriculum gets shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And then now there's a mass system to make the teachers. So when we go out and qualify as a Muslim teacher, then we are one of the teachers that needs to be, to a certain degree, retrained. And so we have to realize that there's a mass system put in place with universities and teacher training programs all across the English-speaking world, and it's not neutral. And my work in Islamic schools showed that something that, in a conversation with Dr. Farah Ahmed, that teachers they don't necessarily want to unlearn in order to properly learn. They just want you to give them practical things like starter activities and resources that help them keep doing what they're doing, but tweak it, right, without rethinking. I have some citations from a book called The Acquisitive Society by Tawney, where he's talking about how this attitude of productivity and marching ahead is sort of a very English mentality that comes about in certain decades, but no social change can ever properly take place without rethinking things from the ground up. But pragmatism is against that whole theoretical basis for your practical activity. That's something that we can get into, because
once you see it, then you realize that we're a product of that. We are modern subjects, right? And a modern subject with Fard Ain Islam is, it's not a completely integrated being. So there's no way around it, right? Part of my learning journey as well was, let me not just be a product of growing up in an American suburb, if you know what I mean. So I had to, you know, like someone said, cut the mommy umbilical cord of, I need my American comfort zones with all the baggage that comes with it, you know, all of the reliance and dependence, and it really, you know, processed food and everything else, it's it makes a dependency. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order for this to be intelligible in the basics, we have to talk about what is the classification of the sciences. I'm going to talk about beyond the trivium there. How is it actually present in the madrasa? Because many people that are in the madrasa, or they know what a guild is, many people don't even know what a guild is anymore. They don't know the principles of the very system, even if they're a graduate of it, very often, right? Then how do you translate that into K-12? So this is not only let me pour ancient wine into new bottles. The Quran uses a metaphor of khamr, so we're not going to be more pious than the Quran, right? You have to know what you're pouring as well, not only the bottle. Okay, so those three steps are absolutely necessary. Now, this presentation itself draws on the MA thesis, which did a literature review of everything I could find on Islamic education, and the implementation of that in, you know, in particular, there was this individual lesson plans made in science, PSHE, Nasheed, and English language and literature, book lists, poem lists, a lot of work done that I think all the educators that I was in contact with at that time realized need to be done. And I want to say immediately that you as a teacher out there, you want to be empowered to do something now. You know, you don't want to be told that there's a project which is going to down after.
Back on here. But while we're waiting, I will encourage people to check out the Life website, which we can link up to this video, as well as the paper. Okay, he's back. Sheikh Mustafa?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, my package, when it sends me a notification, it interrupts. Yeah, so yeah, so the introductory course on Islamic education tried to give people the details of how do I lay a curriculum down? How do I engage the students in activities in a traditional way? Because even contemporary modern activities, this is what I believe, and I'd be happy to discuss it. I believe that they create modern students and modern subjects and modern people. And when I say modern here, I don't mean contemporary. I mean, it's a philosophy. It's a type of being that integrates naturally into the type of culture that we have now, which we need to be able to identify. And it's not, oh, just that, well, this is haram or this is consumerism is starting to get there, but it's still very superficial. What do we mean by consumerism? You know, once we can describe it, then we can really diagnose it forever. You know, if you don't diagnose something properly, then you just keep dealing with, what's the medical term? Yeah, help me out there. But let me keep moving. So the Cambridge Central Mosque talk was trying to clarify principles, but it didn't do the whole package. So in a way, today is going to be a more of a thorough, but still surface level introduction of the whole package, right? And then we're producing manuals that offer a full structure, timetable and everything, with guidance. And that way a person could start a school themselves as soon as they have that. And they would be a pilot, right? I don't recommend anything unless I've have examples of it working somewhere or have done it myself. So the pilot, it's not like we're David Oppenheimer trying to produce the nuclear bomb, and he says there's a chance that this is going to destroy the universe. That's not a good metaphor for what we're doing. We're doing the traditional thing. The traditional thing's already been done. Haj Idrisi said secondary education is a failed social experiment. So, and yet we keep repeating it. So, sometimes we have to learn how to turn the tables. Now, outside of life, AMS, World Conferences on Islamic Education, Zaytuna's ongoing interest in liberal arts education, the Taba Retreat, and the Philosophies of Islamic Education, Rutledge books. Those are some of the contexts that are out there. So let's unfold this package. Let's say that all of us say, what are you trying to do? Start with the end in mind. So we have a consensual aim to produce the perfect person on the model of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the life curriculum aims to make humans human before it aims to make a Muslim a Muslim. And we think that they're the same thing. That, I'd be happy to get rid of the label Islamic education. And I'd be happy to show you that many of the models that are out there called Islamic education, they're imbibing certain modern principles that are against the perfection of the essential human being. So what is Adam made out of? Two universal faculties in the human being, the practical intellect and the theoretical intellect. Okay, so my morals, my instincts, my decisions, my feelings, that is more the practical intellect. It should borrow from the theoretical intellect. And if you purify the practical intellect, it means that you have to be a real integrated person yourself. You have to be able to not just read about the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and read about his generosity and his courage and everything. You have to bring those attributes into the situation that you're in with all of its complications. So you have to have these attributes firm and understand how to implement them and be a real, complete, integrated person. When you do that, you will already be well along the way of purification, because your habits now are a habit where I am making my body and emotions and everything do what they're supposed to do. They're not telling me what to do, such that I am, like the Quran says, are those most guided who walk upside down on their faces, right? That is what happens to us internally when we don't have the tazkiyah and the akhlaq. And then when we do, to use Imam al-Ghazali's metaphor, we free our soul from the imprints coming from body and dependencies and fears and all that type of thing, to make contact with the intelligible natures, the signs and the beings that God has created, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, that are effectively windows, that are the traces of his divine attributes. And if you see them as such, they become windows. But if you see them on a modern natural science paradigm as being globs of matter under extrinsic laws, or you see them as being social constructs, then your window is onto either just a really crippled notion of nature or a crippled notion of society. And it doesn't allow you to ascend and to be to have this perfection of مَا خَلَقْتُ الْإِنسَ وَالْجِنَّ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I didn't create the jinn kind and mankind except to worship me. Okay, so and the traditional translation of that is to know me. So that's your tazkiyah and your ta'aleem. What is ta'aleem? That's something I've focused on elsewhere, because ilm is not facts, right? It's basically insights into the causal natures of things and the proof that it is as such. That's one level. If you want to go to the next level in the Jibril hadith, then it's the level of the ruh. So here we are then. What are our models for the sciences? Well, the Jibril hadith, I would say, let's call this pure deen, right? Islam, Iman, Ihsan, and some people forget to mention Amarat as-Sa'ah, the signs of the end of time. And I think that we have no choice but to see the modern world as part of an expression of the end times, and make it a science which is justified with Islam, as long as we don't do a fatal kind of one-to-one relationship. In other words, you know, that person over there is the Dajjal. I don't know if that person there is the Dajjal, or that person is the Mahdi. So, you know, we follow the traditional ulama in being careful about those types of things. Now, a wider paradigm, because let's say you opened a school right now, Islamic school, 4 sciences. How many people are going to join your Islamic school? Be honest, 0 or 3. Some people would actually. But with the classification of the sciences, you're integrated. You are now a scholar who has this Gnostic aspect. That's a word that needs to be cleaned up, where you know what's in front of you from the point of view of your Adamic and Islamic education. You're able to know the nature of that thing that's appearing to you, and to know whether it is fool's gold or real gold. That
Sheikh Mustafa, are you still with us?
I can hear you. Yeah, there was a hiccup there, a big hiccup, huh?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
we're back.
You're back on. You're still on. So continue. Yep,
Okay.
You're still on. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you know what happens in the late curriculum is that they say, look, some of these sciences, they are organized that way to introduce this term fi nafs al-amr, as things are in themselves. And what Islam is supposed to do is bring the correct orientation to that, and to remove some of the mistakes of the knowledge traditions that served those sciences. And those sciences, in a way, again, they map onto the human being. So you have practical sciences which perfect the practical faculty. You have theoretical sciences which perfect the theoretical faculty. And that notion is missing from contemporary education. And our ulama, they did that in an integrated way. So their knowledge of metaphysical realities and angels and divine attributes, they integrated into their metaphysics. And they did the same thing with natural science and mathematics. It's more complicated than that, but we're on an abbreviated show here. So I want to say that, you know, if you are in a village that's mostly agricultural, then you don't necessarily need an integrated model. But the problem is, if you don't draw from a full integrated classification of the sciences, you're going to be approaching modernity either empty-handed, like, tell me what the truth is, as a person who's usually coming from a culture that was militarily and economically defeated, and then politically as well. It's not It's not a wise way to enter into a conversation, right? So I'm going to have to simplify here to keep moving. All of these, you know, they're sort of icebergs, you know, beneath all of them. And that's what life has been working on, is to answer all of these icebergs. And I like the metaphor of iceberg as well, because in education, we cannot present something overly complex to children, but we don't have to. We just have to present the right thing. And we have reserve. We know what the proofs of that are, right? And we draw on it if they question it, right? So it's not dogmatic. Now, when we have that full integrated notion of the sciences, we need to know what are called the instrumental sciences, especially because this is one of these buzzwords that have kind of grabbed a lot of people's attention, of the trivia-based education, classical-based education. So the instrumental sciences are prerequisites for the practical and theoretical sciences. So in a madrasa curriculum, I have to learn sarf and nahu and everything before I can really understand Quran and Hadith and derive fiqh and aqidah and kalam from them, so that I go into life as a person that's informed practically and theoretically. They also, especially with logic and with rhetoric, that's a classical education. But it's a classical education in which the tools are integrated with their means, their ends, and we'll get to that in the next slides. So next slide, please. Yeah. So one might argue that the craft guilds give you your productive sciences, but this is another element that we want to draw on in our curriculum, because madrasa, we're not merely trying to repeat the madrasa curriculum. So we're drawing on things to give a broad, balanced curriculum. The craft guilds are one, and they have this ethos, which is the futua, right? So somebody that, you know, I don't know the process by which a person chose to go to madrasa or the craft guilds. I do know that, you know, people tended to send, maybe you could say something like, you know, first male of the family would go here, second would go there, something like that, in order for, depending on you know, if they were farming and that type of thing, or had to have an income. There are those types of things that are there, and again, I'm going to leave that for Q&A. But this idea that was in the paper there, that if you fulfill your necessities and you do it with this ethos of futua, of preferring others to yourself and embodying that, then you don't get the modern tycoon. Rather, you get somebody that's gonna send, the shoemaker that's gonna send someone to their neighbor as soon as they make enough money to pay their rent for that day, right? And you're fulfilling your basic needs in a universe, well, let's say in an integrated society where everyone is serving the same end, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the perfection of the human being. So this person is going to give you what you need, done with a craft ethos, so that you can learn the instrumental sciences, so you can learn the practical sciences, so you can learn the theoretical sciences and be the insan kamil. So the whole structure is made to produce human beings, not to produce a modern nation state and economy which does not serve the human being. So those are the basic needs down there. Now the wider system is that before you would go into either of those, you go into the kutab. And we have to remember that the kutab would include the local language. So some people try and rebuild education from a purely Arab model, and that's something that I had to kind of undo myself. So I had to go and see how do they do things in Kurdish or Turkish or Persian speaking countries. You know, a lot of the Darul Uloom curriculum books are written in Persian, actually, not just Urdu. But, you know, their ulama don't even necessarily comfortably speak Arabic, and yet they're an alim. So we have to check our paradigms here, right? After the kutab, right? So let's say from the age of 4, 5, 6, not 7, to 11, they're in the kutab. Then from the age of whatever it is, 10, 11, 12, they're in the madrasa till the age of 16, 17, 18, 19. And that still is in operation in many countries. After the kutab, they sort of split, madrasa or the guild. That is the full system that we're coming from. Now, if you look like at the Sultan Hassan Mosque here, on what is my left side, over towards the north arrow, so in the middle, you have the courtyard with the 4 madhabs being taught around it. At the back, you have a hospital, you have craft guilds with their you know, where they would put their shingle up and have their workshops, and line up and borrow things from each other, have, you know, store the various materials that they would need to operate their craft, and have a place where people could come and buy directly from them. It's a self-sustained, and it's also environmentally sustainable model that results in perfect human beings. So it's not a, you know, the only challenge is now that the space is already filled up with a centralized technocratic system that has bought our hearts into it, so that we're trying to go up a false social ladder, right? It's like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf mentioned many years ago, the STEM is not the social ladder that the elite in the West themselves want to go up. They don't see becoming an engineer or something as a lifestyle that the elite in the West themselves want to have, because it's not a real education. And people like Michael Faraday, which I think is a point I'll come to later, they would have trained in the classics in a place like Cambridge, and then they would specialize in modern science. So they became an educated human being before they went and made their discoveries in natural science. Yeah. Okay, so then
Sheikh Mustafa, I'll just mention we might go for another 1 or 2 slides, and then we'll open it up to a few questions before we'll have to close out, and then we can put some links perhaps to other material that you had intended to cover, inshallah.
Okay, and I'm going to try and stick to 1 minute per slide here, and maybe, if it's okay, get through 3 or 4, just so I make sure that there's a whole view to kind of refer back to. Is that not a bad compromise?
Sure.
Okay,
that's fine.
Okay,
inshallah.
So here are all the sciences. Productive, which is a means to the instrumental. Instrumental, which is a means. So there's a teleological and Unitarian vision, Tawhidi notion in the whole of the society, in the whole of the curriculum. And I've added some things that are kind of question marks after the theoretical. What about the Sunnah physical arts? What about prophetic medicine? So the curriculum itself is divided into, if you remember at the beginning, I said that we want to talk about how there is a classification of the sciences, and then how was it actually present in the madrasa. So in the madrasa, you have grammar, sarf, rhetoric, logic. These are the means, or the instrumental sciences. They're called the wasa'il in the Azhari system. And if we go and look at the next one, then you get later on, a few years into the curriculum, into fiqh, aqidah, kalam, tasawwuf, tafsir as well. Tafsir is really a science you can't engage in unless you're sort of a master of all the other sciences. But not everyone has to become a mufassir to become an alim. These things you do have to know. And if you notice, you've got your practical, your theoretical, and your tazkiyah there. And your instrumental and liberal arts curriculum was a means to that. To me, if we don't encapsulate this, our curriculum is a missed opportunity. Okay, so how do we do this third step of getting it into a K-12? We have to know what it means to integrate in a realist way. And so what I mean by that is we don't want our curriculum to just be, I mean, yeah, we like interdisciplinary. Yes, we understand that students don't see the world compartmentalized, but that doesn't mean that things aren't both compartmentalized and resolved into this Tawhidi unity that we see in a stained glass window or rainbow. It's, you know, we have to do it in a way that actually gives ilm, and because otherwise, if we don't have ilm, we don't have ta'aleem, we don't have education. That's another point to come back to. So Fard Ain and Fard Kifaya priorities, they need to be embodied in the curriculum, and they were. Science and reason and revelation integrated with eternal principles, like the 10 principles. Those are all eternal principles. That has to be the model that we're using. Then we have to integrate it with local languages. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The Persians and the Turks and Kurds, they already did that, and they're still doing it. Then we have to deal with the modern assessment matrix. That is tricky. It's less tricky in North America because you can get through K to 12 with showing general competencies, and we're just about there. The life curriculum, we want to add cultural studies, including the principles of modernity, which we consider to be an obligation. Imam al-Ghazali said, if you raise a child in a society that has bid'ah in it, okay, what about kufr? He doesn't talk about kufr, he says bid'ah. You are required to teach that child how to respond to that with proofs by the age of bulugh, or 15. I forget exactly. It was 15 is kind of a safety age where you can be sure that people are baligh. Now, and we have to have a notion of what is a modern, a healthy culture. To my mind, after many years of study of this topic, I would say that if you don't have a full classification, you don't even have a conception of how to make a healthy culture. So if we're just going and using social sciences and natural sciences and contemporary sciences, we're going to be stuck with their culture. I have a bookshelf of books of people who are Western, sometimes Christian, sometimes not, who are talking about how to rectify the culture. And it always requires going back to having a unifying metaphysics, to having liberal arts. If you just have theology on its own, you become, you know, like at the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, I'm on the humanities bundle, as it were, because of the research focuses, because I was in the theology department where I submitted my doctoral thesis. What is the impact of theology on the humanities? Nothing. It's ghetto. Inside the humanities, it's like a catch-all bag, just like area studies. Like I might as well be trained in Slovenic or Norwegian or some, you know, area studies, right? It's not a prestigious dynamical part of the so this is something Wild Halak has pointed out. The modern university has a dynamic, and we can't be ignorant of that. Otherwise, you know. And then the idea of how do you find good work? I do have some other slides about the actual curriculum that we produce. Like in primary, we have 5 daily subjects, 5 weekly subjects, so it's kind of 6 subjects, which you can imagine kind of, you know, you're 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 throughout the week, and then you're 5. So everybody has to do mathematics. Let me pull back just for the sake of keeping a shape to the time. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Mustafa. And I think people that are listening to this, either live or as a recording, can get in touch with you to dive in a bit deeper. And I know you're setting up meetings. Your life team is happy to meet with educators and schools that would like to learn more about the full curriculum package, inshallah. So at this point, I would like to open it up to any questions. Since we're live streaming this, you can put it in the chat, and we'll have time to answer just a couple questions probably if they come in. And then in this video description, I will link up the Life website, and that's a place where people can go to learn more, and even, I believe, sign up for some of the courses that are still there as on-demand courses, like the Logic course, inshallah. So perhaps while we're waiting for any questions to come in here, Sheikh Mustafa, if you'd like to offer any concluding thoughts, any advice for the educators listening about how to perhaps move forward with any practical takeaways from today's session.
Yeah, and make sure you give me a signal immediately if and when something comes in. So I'll
sure.
I'll happily produce filler for you, CDI. No, but this is you're a busy man, so this is my one way of grabbing your suhbah here, and I wish I had a feel of the whole audience out there, but I do see the very dynamic group, mashallah, on the WhatsApp. So speaking to all of you, I'd say that you know, you can see how something very similar to what I'm talking about already exists in like the junior great books. I use the junior great books in a school in Birmingham, and it doesn't answer all your questions, right? Like it doesn't have a maths program, it doesn't have necessarily all the other programs, but I personally have kind of inclined away from structuring all of the education in terms of lessons with activities where there's no classical text, because I believe that produces modern people. And I would say that I think the people that attended the Introduction to Islamic Education course, they could almost palpably feel, what would I do tomorrow if I was implementing this? Because otherwise it sounds like a big jump, right? We had debates at the Institute of Education. You know, it sounds a bit sophomoric at the moment, but you know, our educational objectives, like lesson objectives, right? Is that Islamic? There's nothing wrong with it, but we have to look at the nature of the activity and see if the activity is not sort of based on a, to use an overused word, dumbed down model where it's almost catering to a short attention span and reifying a short attention span, and somehow tied to an entertainment model that doesn't allow you to get into knowledge as soon as possible. So I'll give you an example. If you start off with the traditional books of Sarf, and then you know how to do this in Arabic and English as well, or any local language, right? So, you know, I have some of the Charlotte Mason books. They start off with what looks like a classical education, where you have 2 sentences on the paper, and then on the right side you have a pencil sketch of some beautiful scene of a cat or a cottage or something like that. You can make this very, very, very child friendly, and yet have them in a system where that piece of knowledge that they're taking is a real bedrock in a very carefully thought out classical system, where they can say, I now have knowledge. You know, it might be 1 or 2 facts that I learned today, but this is knowledge. When we learn language in a contemporary model, or even mathematics, I mean, it's a big topic. I looked a lot into the philosophy of mathematics, but let's just stick to one thing for the moment. The literacy scheme in the UK was a battleground, and it occurred after there was already the attack on grammar, right? And I saw something pop up there, so I don't want to miss that. But you know, if we're basically using a model that imbibes that kind of 1960s anti-grammar, where what is language? Well, it's what language users say it is, and there's no other meaning to language other than it just mapping out what French or English speakers say that their words mean. Then you can't do what you do with proper definitions, which is for your terms to be recalibrated to be reflecting reality. So and grammar should be a ladder, just like logic. It should be a ladder into the real sciences and to real knowledge straight off the bat. So yeah, I see the question there. So let me.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. It's more of a comment, and I think you might have a future pilot school here, perhaps to collaborate with the life curriculum. This is just a request, so I can connect you up afterwards. I see it's Brother Omar from the Ihya Revival School, which, mashallah, is also a really exciting project that we all can gain some inspiration from. And in fact, we shared in the GAIS group one of the papers written by Sister Corey from that school. So really wonderful to have Brother Omar with us here, and I'll be happy to connect you and anyone else that would like to connect further with Sheikh Mustafa. So before we depart, Sheikh Mustafa, we do have a parting gift for your time today. So I will ask that
I hope
Brother
it's dua.
Idris, if you can display that on the screen. It will be dua too, but it's also, if we can share here, this certificate of appreciation. And this is an appreciation for your valuable contribution, support, encouragement to the Global Association of Islamic Schools. May Allah bless you with His choicest blessings. So we offer you that, signed by our head of the steering committee, Brother Muhammad Zafar Ahmed. So a sincere thank you for your time, and a dua that Allah preserves you and keeps you firm on the straight path, and continue to guide many of us. Myself, I will speak for, as someone who has benefited greatly and been inspired by your work. Just knowing that there is this arsenal of resources in our tradition that we can draw upon to help revive our Islamic schools gives me a lot of hope. And I know for many of our educators that are joining today and will listen to the recording. So, Jazakallah khair. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue, because it's ongoing. And of course, we know it's ilm to amal. So it's looking at how do we then, as you said, put this into action so that we can reap these benefits, inshallah, from the knowledge we've gained.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say without interrupting you is we're with you in the ring. You know, whether it's 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, getting it off the ground and making sure it works, and knowing that it, you know, tweaking things and people uploading their own approaches and units and resources. It has to be a communal effort, and you know, we could start tomorrow with the younger age group and produce an alternative that, you know. So we're with you in the ring, as they say. So alhamdulillah. Okay, but
Jazakallah khair. May Allah facilitate our efforts and grant us tawfiq fi dunya wa fil akhirah. I'll just close with the dua of the majlis. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam to everyone. Okay, Allah bless. Allah bless you. Take care.